In the late 1970s, Nelson Bunker Hunt was one of the richest men in America. He owned vast oil assets, controlled enormous wealth, and belonged to one of the most powerful families in the world. For most people, that would have been enough. But for Hunt, it wasn't. He already had millions, then billions. Yet he wanted more, much more. What happened next would become one of the most unbelievable financial stories ever told. At the height of his power, Hunt attempted something no billionaire had successfully done before. He tried to dominate the global silver market, not just invest in silver, not just profit from silver, control it. As silver prices soared, his fortune exploded. Newspapers called him a financial genius. Investors watched in amazement. His wealth seemed limitless. Then everything changed. Within a matter of days, billions of dollars disappeared. The market collapsed. Banks demanded repayment. His empire began to crumble. And the billionaire who once seemed unstoppable found himself drowning in debt. How does a man go from being one of the richest people in America to becoming a symbol of financial disaster? Was it bad luck? A market crash? Or did greed push him beyond the point of no return? This is the extraordinary story of Nelson Bunker Hunt, the oil billionaire who risked everything chasing more and lost almost all of it. Part 2. Childhood and Early Ambition. Long before Nelson Bunker Hunt became a billionaire, he was born into one of America's most influential families. He entered the world in 1926 as the son of H.L. Hunt, a legendary oil tycoon who built one of the largest fortunes in American history. Growing up, Bunker Hunt experienced a life most people could only imagine. His family possessed immense wealth. Their oil business generated enormous profits, and opportunities surrounded him from an early age. But being born rich came with its own challenges. The Hunt family was known for its ambition. Success was expected. Standing out among his brothers was not easy. Bunker Hunt understood that simply inheriting wealth would never be enough. He wanted to build his own legacy. Like his father, he became fascinated with oil. The industry offered enormous rewards for those willing to take risks. And Bunker Hunt was never afraid of risk. Throughout his early business career, he invested heavily in oil exploration. Some ventures failed, others generated significant profits. Over time, his fortune continued growing. By the 1960s and 1970s, he had become one of the wealthiest businessmen in America. Yet despite his success, Hunt was constantly searching for new opportunities. He believed that fortunes could be multiplied, that bigger risks could lead to bigger rewards. It was a mindset that helped make him rich. But it was also the mindset that would eventually put everything in danger. As inflation rose during the 1970s and global economic uncertainty increased, Hunt became worried about the future of paper money. He feared that traditional currencies would lose value. He wanted something tangible, something he believed governments couldn't manipulate. That search led him to a precious metal that would change his life forever: silver. At first, it seemed like a smart investment, a way to protect wealth during uncertain times. But what began as a simple investment soon evolved into something much larger, something far more dangerous. Nelson Bunker Hunt wasn't content with owning a little silver. He wanted to own more than anyone else. And that ambition would eventually trigger one of the most spectacular financial disasters in history. Part 3. The Journey to Success. By the 1970s, Nelson Bunker Hunt had already achieved what most people spend their entire lives pursuing. He was incredibly wealthy. His family's oil empire generated enormous profits. His personal fortune continued to grow. But Hunt wasn't interested in preserving wealth. He wanted to multiply it. The world economy during the 1970s was filled with uncertainty. Inflation was rising. Currencies were fluctuating. Many investors feared that paper money would lose value. Hunt shared those concerns. He believed precious metals offered protection against economic instability. Gold was heavily regulated at the time. Silver, however, presented a different opportunity. At first, Hunt simply purchased silver as a hedge against inflation. But as prices began rising, his confidence grew. He became convinced that silver was dramatically undervalued. The more he studied the market, the more aggressive he became. Soon, he wasn't buying thousands of ounces. He was buying millions, then tens of millions. Together with his brother William Herbert Hunt and several wealthy partners, he accumulated massive amounts of physical silver, truckloads of silver, Vaults filled with silver, shipments moving across continents. The scale was almost impossible to imagine. As demand increased, prices began climbing rapidly. Investors noticed, traders noticed, the media noticed. Then silver became one of the hottest investments in the world. And at the center of it all stood Nelson Bunker Hunt. His strategy appeared brilliant. Every increase in silver prices made him richer. Every new purchase pushed prices even higher. Some observers began to wonder whether the Hunt brothers were gaining too much influence over the market. But while critics raised concerns, Hunt focused on one thing: buying more silver. By the end of the decade, the Hunt brothers controlled an astonishing share of the world's available silver supply. Some estimates suggested they controlled more than 100 million ounces directly, with influence over much more through contracts and partnerships. Their paper profits exploded. Their fortune reached extraordinary levels. At one point, Nelson Bunker Hunt was considered one of the richest men in the world. Financial journalists called him a genius. Investors admired his boldness. His strategy appeared unstoppable. Then silver prices surged to nearly $50 per ounce in early 1980. What had once been a simple investment had become a global phenomenon. For Hunt, it looked like victory. Years of aggressive buying had paid off. His wealth had never been greater. His influence had never been stronger. And yet, hidden beneath the surface, a dangerous problem was growing. The higher silver prices climbed, the more fragile the entire system became. Banks were watching, regulators were watching, exchanges were watching, and they were about to take actions that would change everything. The billionaire who believed he had mastered the market was about to discover that even the richest man cannot control it forever. Part 4: Peak of Fame and the Silver Empire. By early 1980, Nelson Bunker Hunt had reached the peak of his power. The gamble that began as a hedge against inflation had transformed into one of the largest fortunes in the world. Silver prices had risen dramatically. Investors everywhere were talking about precious metals, and at the center of the story stood the Hunt brothers. To many observers, Nelson Bunker Hunt looked like a financial genius. His strategy appeared flawless. Every month, silver prices climbed higher. Every increase added hundreds of millions of dollars to his wealth. The media closely followed his moves. Financial analysts debated his influence. Some admired his vision. Others feared the consequences of his growing control over the silver market. At the height of the boom, the Hunt brothers were believed to control an astonishing amount of silver. Their holdings were so large that some people wondered if they could effectively dictate prices. The numbers were staggering. Their paper wealth reached billions of dollars. Their influence stretched across international markets. Banks eagerly lent them money. Investors rushed to follow their strategy, and silver seemed unstoppable. For Hunt, it was the ultimate validation. Years of risk-taking had paid off. The son of a legendary oil tycoon had created another fortune of his own. He wasn't just rich, he was becoming a financial legend. But success often creates a dangerous illusion. The longer something rises, the more people begin to believe it can never fall. That belief spread throughout the silver market. Investors borrowed money to buy more silver. Speculators poured into the market. Prices rose faster and faster. The excitement became almost contagious. Yet, behind the scenes, regulators and exchange officials were becoming increasingly concerned. The market was behaving abnormally. Volatility was growing, and many feared that a dangerous bubble was forming. Eventually, action was taken. The commodity exchanges introduced new rules designed to limit speculation. Restrictions were placed on certain trading activities. Buying silver became more difficult. Access to financing tightened. For most investors, these changes were concerning. For Nelson Bunker Hunt, they were devastating. His strategy depended on continued access to credit. It depended on rising prices, and it depended on confidence. Once those pillars started weakening, the entire empire became vulnerable. At first, Hunt believed the market would recover. He had survived setbacks before. He had enormous resources, and he remained convinced that silver would continue rising. But this time was different. The forces turning against him were larger than any individual investor, even one of the richest men in America. The silver empire that seemed invincible was beginning to crack, and soon those cracks would become a collapse so dramatic that it would shock the entire financial world. The greatest triumph of Nelson Bunker Hunt's career was about to become his greatest disaster. Part 5. Black Thursday, the collapse that destroyed a billionaire. For years, Nelson Bunker Hunt had watched his fortune grow. Silver prices climbed, his wealth expanded, and his confidence became stronger with every passing month. But financial markets can be unforgiving. What rises too quickly often falls even faster. In early 1980, the silver market began showing signs of weakness. The excitement that had pushed prices higher was fading. Investors became nervous, banks became cautious, and regulators continued tightening restrictions. At first, the decline seemed temporary. Silver prices dipped slightly, then fell further. Hunt remained confident. He believed the market would recover. After all, he had billions of dollars invested. Surely silver couldn't collapse, but it did. As prices continued falling, lenders began demanding additional collateral. The Hunt brothers had borrowed enormous sums of money to finance their silver purchases. As long as prices rose, the debt was manageable. When prices fell, everything changed. Suddenly, banks wanted guarantees. Brokerage firms demanded payments. Creditors wanted answers. The pressure intensified day after day. Then came March 27, 1980, a day that would become known as Black Thursday. The silver market crashed. Prices plunged dramatically. Panic spread throughout Wall Street. Investors rushed to sell. Financial institutions feared massive losses. And Nelson Bunker Hunt found himself at the center of the storm. In a matter of hours, billions of dollars in paper wealth disappeared. The fortune that had taken years to build was evaporating before his eyes. Phone calls flooded financial offices. Traders scrambled to limit damage. Markets across the country reacted with shock. Some feared the collapse could trigger a broader financial crisis. The Hunt brothers faced margin calls they could not easily satisfy. Their debts had become enormous. The same leverage that magnified their gains was now magnifying their losses. It was a financial nightmare. Just weeks earlier, Hunt had appeared untouchable. Now he was fighting to survive. Banks organized emergency rescue efforts to prevent further chaos. Financial institutions worried that the Hunt collapse could spread throughout the economy. For a time, uncertainty dominated the markets. No one knew exactly how bad the damage would become. But one fact was undeniable. The silver empire was finished. Prices continued falling. Losses continued mounting. And Nelson Bunker Hunt's fortune suffered one of the largest destructions of wealth in modern financial history. The billionaire who once dreamed of controlling the silver market had instead become trapped by it. His greatest success had become his greatest mistake. And while the market collapse ended the silver empire, it was only the beginning of Hunt's personal downfall. The legal battles, the debts, the public humiliation, those were still ahead, and they would haunt him for years to come. Part 6. Debt, Downfall, and the Lesson of Greed. After Black Thursday, Nelson Bunker Hunt's world changed forever. The man who had once been one of the richest people in America was now facing a mountain of debt. The losses were staggering. Billions of dollars had vanished. The silver market that had made him wealthy had turned into a financial disaster. But the collapse wasn't just about losing money. It was about losing power, influence, reputation, and the image of invincibility that had surrounded him for years. Creditors came calling. Banks demanded repayment. Legal battles emerged from every direction. Regulators accused the Hunt brothers of attempting to manipulate the silver market. The financial empire that seemed unstoppable only months earlier was now under intense scrutiny. Over the following years, the situation worsened. Court cases dragged on. Financial penalties mounted. Assets had to be sold. Properties were liquidated. Investments disappeared. The billionaire lifestyle that Hunt once enjoyed became increasingly difficult to maintain. Then came another devastating blow. In 1988, Nelson Bunker Hunt filed for personal bankruptcy. It was a stunning moment. One of the richest men in the world had officially become a debtor. The headlines shocked the public. How could someone with so much wealth lose so much? The answer was surprisingly simple. He believed success would continue forever. He believed he could control forces that were larger than any individual. And he believed that more was never enough. That final lesson may be the most important part of this story. Nelson Bunker Hunt didn't start as a failure. He was highly intelligent, hardworking, ambitious, and enormously successful. But success can become dangerous when it creates overconfidence. The same risk-taking mindset that helped him build wealth eventually pushed him beyond safe limits. Instead of protecting his fortune, he gambled with it. Instead of preserving success, he chased something bigger. And that pursuit ultimately cost him billions. Today, Nelson Bunker Hunt is remembered not only as an oil billionaire, he is remembered as a warning, a reminder that wealth does not eliminate risk, a reminder that markets cannot be controlled forever, and a reminder that greed often disguises itself as ambition. For a brief moment, Hunt appeared to have conquered the silver market. The world watched him rise. Then, the world watched him fall. His story remains one of the greatest boom and bust tales in financial history. Because sometimes the difference between a genius and a cautionary tale is only one decision, one risk, one belief that the rules no longer apply. And for Nelson Bunker Hunt, that belief cost him everything. What do you think? Was Nelson Bunker Hunt a visionary investor who got caught in a market collapse? Or did greed ultimately destroy one of the greatest fortunes in American history? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Rise Beyond for more incredible stories of wealth, power, success, and downfall.